My wife, 25 years younger, betrayed me with my cousin to steal millions. But 4 months after the wedding, I secretly annulled the marriage. And for 3 years, I watched them plan my destruction while I planned theirs. I'm 54 years old. I work in private equity investments, and what I'm about to tell you completely destroyed my faith in people, in family, and basically in everything I believed about love and loyalty. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I met Elena at that damn charity event in Manhattan about 5 years ago. Although the truth is, the real story starts way before that, when I lost my first wife. My first wife died when I was in my late 30s, almost 40, a brain aneurysm out of nowhere, and left me alone with 2 kids, Sophie and Ethan, who at the time were super young. I spent years, literally years, focusing only on them and work, building my investment firm until it became something big. You know, the kind that manages hundreds of millions in assets. I wasn't interested in dating anyone, didn't want to replace my wife, and honestly thought that part of my life was over forever. My kids grew up, went off to college, and I stayed in my Manhattan penthouse working like crazy, traveling for business, living that millionaire bachelor life that sounds glamorous but is actually pretty empty. Then I met Elena at a charity gala at the plaza, one of those pretentious things where everyone goes in tuxedos and designer dresses to feel good about themselves for donating money. I was 49 and she was 24, and yeah, I know what you're thinking, but at the time I didn't care about the age difference because Elena was, she was absolutely stunning. Not just physically, which obviously she was, but she had this energy, this vitality that I had forgotten existed. I approached her to talk because she was standing alone, looking at one of the artworks being auctioned, and we started talking about art, about travel, about life. And it was like I suddenly felt alive again after years of being on autopilot. The thing is, our relationship developed super fast. Like within weeks, we were seeing each other constantly. I was taking her to the best restaurants in the city. We'd travel to Paris and Milan on weekends because I could, and she'd never left the country. Elena came from a middle-class family, nothing special. Worked in public relations for a mediocre firm, making like $45,000 a year. And I think at first what attracted me was that she wasn't after my money, or at least that's what I thought like an idiot. She seemed genuinely interested in me, in my stories, in my life, and when I introduced her to my kids during a family dinner about 6 months after we met, she was amazing with them. Like super respectful, and not trying to replace their mother, which I really appreciated. I also introduced her to my extended family, including my cousin Nathan, who was like 39 at the time and basically was the classic failed entrepreneur always looking for investors for his crazy ideas. Nathan was charismatic. You know, one of those guys you like immediately. Super fun at family parties, always with some incredible story about some new project that was supposedly going to make him rich. I loved him, honestly. He was my cousin and we'd grown up together. Though I always knew he wasn't the most reliable person in the world, but I never thought he'd go as far as he did. About 8 months into dating Elena, Nathan contacted me with this investment proposal in a tech startup. Something about artificial intelligence applied to retail, and it seemed weird to me because Nathan had never been in tech before. But Elena started encouraging me to hear him out, saying things like, "Nathan is family and we should support him," that it sounded like a great opportunity. I ended up investing like $500,000 in his company, not because I really believed in the project, but because he was my cousin, and because Elena insisted so much that I thought I was being a good partner, supporting my family. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there, but I was too blinded by how happy Elena made me. A year and a half after meeting, I proposed to her with this super elaborate proposal on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Like I rented a private 150-foot yacht, took her sailing along the Amalfi Coast, and proposed at sunset with a 6-carat diamond ring that cost more than most people make in 5 years. She said yes through tears and hugs, and I felt like I'd finally found happiness again after so many years of loneliness. We planned a huge wedding at my Hamptons estate, gardens full of imported flowers, giant white tents, live orchestra, all that ostentatious shit that costs like $500,000 to organize. The wedding was beautiful, perfect. All our friends and family were there. Nathan was one of my groomsmen because, he was my favorite cousin, and I thought he really cared about my happiness. Here comes the part where everything gets interesting, and it's something neither Elena nor Nathan discovered until years later. 4 months after the wedding, I traveled alone to La Romana in the Dominican Republic, supposedly for business, but I actually went there to secretly annul our marriage. Why? Because I started noticing weird things almost immediately after we got married. Small details that made me nervous, like Elena starting to ask too much about my bank accounts, about my will, about how my investments were structured. I also heard her a couple of times talking on the phone in a low voice and hanging up quickly when I entered the room. I didn't have proof of anything specific yet, but my instinct told me something wasn't right, and after building a financial empire from scratch, you learn to trust your instincts. The annulment in the Dominican Republic was surprisingly easy to get if you have the right money and the right contacts. Basically, I argued that the marriage had been contracted under false pretenses, paid the right lawyers, and got the official papers declaring our marriage null from the beginning. The key was that this wasn't registered in the United States. So, for all legal purposes in New York, Elena and I were still married. But in reality, I had documents proving we never were. I kept those papers in a safety deposit box at my bank and continued with my life as if nothing had happened, waiting, watching. The next 3 years were, on the surface, absolutely perfect. We traveled all over the world, bought a second property in Aspen. Elena renovated the Manhattan penthouse with a luxury interior designer who charged like $300,000, and I gave her access to several of my bank accounts and unlimited credit cards because, she was supposed to be my wife, and I wanted her to be happy. But the whole time I was paying attention, monitoring her movements, occasionally checking her messages when she left her phone unlocked, though I never found anything concrete. Just that persistent feeling that something didn't add up. Then things started to change more obviously. Elena began going out much more frequently with her friends. Like she'd come home at 2 or 3 in the morning smelling of alcohol and expensive perfume, and when I'd ask her where she'd been, she'd give me vague answers about dinners and clubs that didn't sound entirely convincing. She also started acting more distant with me, less interested in sex, more interested in her phone, and would spend hours locked in her office at the penthouse doing who knows what. I played the role of the trusting and somewhat oblivious husband, but I was actually documenting everything, taking mental notes of her behavior patterns. The first truly revealing moment was when I heard her talking on the phone with someone. I had come home early from work and she didn't hear me come in, and I heard her say things like, I was boring, that I was good for stability and money, but that she needed more excitement in her life. My heart stopped in that moment, Because one thing is suspecting your wife doesn't really love you, and a completely different thing is hearing her say it out loud. But I didn't confront her, didn't say anything, just kept acting normal. While inside, I started planning exactly how I was going to destroy her. A few weeks later, I found a text message on her phone from someone saved as L, a message that said something like, "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." Elena had left her phone on the table while she showered, and I simply unlocked it. But that message didn't have enough context, could have been anything, so I decided to wait and keep collecting evidence. What surprised me most about myself in that moment was how calm I was. I didn't feel immediate rage or pain, just this cold, calculated feeling that I was finally going to get the answers I needed. The real revelation came during a family dinner at Nathan's house about 2 months later. The whole family was there. Uncles, cousins, everyone eating and drinking like at any normal family gathering, and I started noticing how Nathan and Elena interacted. It wasn't anything super obvious, but there were small things, like he'd pass her things at the table with a little too much hand contact. She'd laugh too loud at his jokes that weren't even that funny. And at one point I saw them in the kitchen standing super close to each other, talking in low voices with this intimacy. That's just not normal between cousins-in-law. My stomach twisted in that moment because suddenly everything started making sense. Nathan being so insistent that Elena convinced me to invest in his startup, Elena encouraging me so much to give him money. How easily they got along from the beginning. When we got home that night, I waited for Elena to fall into a deep sleep, took her phone, and this time, I really dug deep. I found the messages with Nathan, months and months of explicit messages, not just flirting, but photos, videos, detailed plans of hotel meetups while I was supposedly on business trips. I also found messages with at least 3 other different men, guys she'd met at clubs or at the gym, conversations just as explicit and treacherous. But the worst part, what really broke something inside me, were the messages between Elena and Nathan, where they talked specifically about me, about how to manipulate me, about how long they thought they'd have to wait before they could divorce me and take half my fortune, about how Nathan was going to use my money to build his company and eventually they wouldn't need me anymore. I read those messages for hours, sitting in my office at the penthouse while Elena slept in our $5,000 king-size bed. And I didn't cry, didn't scream, just felt this cold, crystalline rage that filled me completely. I took screenshots of absolutely everything, hundreds of messages, photos, videos, evidence of every betrayal, every lie, every plan they had against me. I sent them to my encrypted personal email and then deleted the messaging app history from her phone so she wouldn't know she'd been discovered. Because you see, at that moment I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them immediately like any betrayed husband. I was going to play the long game. I was going to destroy them systematically and completely in a way they'd never recover from. The next few months were probably the hardest of my life because I had to act completely normal. Like keep being the loving and trusting husband, give Elena good morning kisses, have dinners with Nathan where we talked about his startup that had basically collapsed because it turns out he had no idea what he was doing in the tech world. But inside, I was executing my plan step by step. First, I started systematically transferring assets out of accounts Elena had access to, moving them to trusts and offshore accounts that only I controlled. I talked to my lawyers about how to completely protect my assets in case of divorce, though obviously I didn't mention to the secret annulment. Yet because I wanted to save that card for the perfect moment. I also started cutting off her financial access gradually, first reducing credit card limits, then closing joint accounts little by little, always with credible excuses about tax restructuring or company audits. Elena started noticing. Obviously, because suddenly her black cards were being declined at Bergdorf Goodman or at her favorite restaurants, and she'd ask me what was going on with a mixture of confusion and panic in her eyes. I'd tell her they were just temporary problems with the bank, that I'd fix it, and she seemed to believe me, though I could see she was getting increasingly nervous. The next step was to confront Nathan directly, but not in the way he expected. I invited him to my Manhattan office under the pretext of discussing another possible investment. He arrived all excited with his laptop full of PowerPoint presentations about his new business idea, some shit about blockchain and cryptocurrencies he clearly didn't understand. I let him talk for like 20 minutes, while I leaned back in my $5,000 leather chair watching him with this calm that was clearly making him uncomfortable. When he finished his pitch, I told him I wasn't interested in investing more in his entrepreneurial fantasies, and the expression on his face changed immediately, like from hopeful to confused to almost angry. Then I took out my iPad and showed him the screenshots of his messages with Elena, slowly scrolling through the most explicit conversations and the plans they'd made to rob me. Nathan turned completely pale, opened his mouth but nothing came out, and I just kept showing him more and more evidence while explaining in detail exactly how I was going to destroy him. I told him I'd already talked to several of his other potential investors and contacts in the tech industry to make sure he never got funding for anything ever again, that his reputation was completely finished, and that he could consider himself formally exiled from the family. Because I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person he was. Nathan tried to apologize, like stammering excuses about how Elena had seduced him, how it had all been her idea, basically throwing her completely under the bus to save his own skin. I told him I didn't give a shit who started what, that they were both equally guilty and both were going to pay the consequences. I kicked him out of my office and told him if he ever tried to contact me or Elena again, I'd make all the messages public and make sure he was so socially humiliated he'd have to move to another country. He left there literally shaking, and I stayed alone in my office feeling this dark satisfaction I'd never experienced before. That night, I prepared a special dinner at the penthouse, hired a private chef to prepare Elena's favorite dishes, opened a $3,000 bottle of wine from my collection, and set the dining table, with candles and all that romantic shit. Elena came home like confused because I hadn't done something like that in months, and she looked beautiful as always in one of her designer dresses I'd paid for, completely unaware of what was about to happen. We ate while I made casual conversation, asking about her day, laughing at her stories about her friends, acting like the perfect husband one last time. When we finished eating, I poured more wine and finally told her we needed to talk. The expression on her face changed immediately. You know, that trapped animal look when they know something bad is coming. I told her very calmly that I knew everything about Nathan, about the other men, about the plans they'd made, about every lie she'd told me for years. Elena tried to deny it at first, like instant tears and dramatic acting about how I was crazy and misinterpreting everything. But when I took out my phone and started reading her own messages word for word, she shut up completely and just sat there with her face red with shame and rage. I gave her time to process, to try to find more excuses, but basically she just babbled things without sense about how she really loved me. But I didn't pay her enough attention, that Nathan had been a mistake, that the other men meant nothing. I just looked at her wondering how I'd been so stupid not to see before who this person really was. Then I told her we were obviously getting divorced, that her access to all my accounts was already completely cut off, that the penthouse was in my name only so she'd have to leave, and that she wasn't going to receive a single cent from me in any settlement because I had enough evidence of her infidelity to make sure of that. Elena started screaming at that point, like hysterical, saying she was my wife and had rights, that she was going to sue me for half of everything, that her lawyers were going to destroy me. I let her scream for a while, waiting for the perfect moment, and then I took out of my briefcase the annulment documents from the Dominican Republic and put them in front of her on the table. At first she didn't understand what she was looking at, but when I explained that technically we'd never been legally married, that I'd annulled our marriage years ago, and therefore she had no legal right to anything of mine, it was like watching someone realize in real time that their entire life had just collapsed. Her face went through like 10 different emotions in 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, absolute terror, and finally a rage so pure that for a moment I thought she was going to try to physically attack me. She started screaming even louder, saying those documents couldn't be real, that somehow they were fake or illegal. But I assured her they were completely legitimate and my lawyers had already verified everything. I told her she had 48 hours to get her things out of my penthouse, that after that I'd change all the locks and anything left behind was going to be donated or thrown away. Elena tried to negotiate, like begging me to reconsider, saying we could work it out, that she'd change, but I was completely done with her. The next 2 days were absolutely chaotic. Elena packed her things while I watched from my office. She cried and screamed and occasionally broke things in fits of rage, but I stayed completely cold and unmoved. I called building security to be alert in case she tried to steal anything or cause bigger problems. When she finally left with her Louis Vuitton suitcases full of the clothes and jewelry I'd bought her, I watched her leave the penthouse toward the elevator without saying a word, and I felt this strange mix of relief, sadness, and satisfaction. I later found out she had to stay in the guest room at one of her friends' houses because she literally had nowhere to go, no money of her own because she'd depended completely on me for years, nothing. But I wasn't done yet, remember? Because the goal wasn't just to kick Elena out of my life, it was to make sure both she and Nathan paid socially for what they'd done. I organized a family meeting at my Hamptons house, like I summoned my entire extended family under the pretext of an important announcement. Everyone arrived thinking maybe I was going to announce an engagement of my kids or something. Uncles, cousins, siblings, all sitting in my huge living room waiting curiously. I told them the complete story, every disgusting detail of Elena and Nathan's betrayal, and as I talked, I projected on a large screen some of the most damning screenshots of their messages, obviously edited to not show super explicit content because there were kids present, but enough for everyone to understand exactly what kind of people they were. The silence in that room was deafening, like you could hear people breathing as they processed what they were seeing. Some of my relatives started crying. Others looked angry. Everyone was absolutely in shock. Nathan wasn't even there because I hadn't invited him. But I told everyone he was formally exiled from the family, that he wasn't welcome at any future family events, and that anyone who maintained contact with him was basically choosing his side over mine. Sounds harsh. I know. But family loyalty means something to me, and he'd crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Most of the family agreed immediately. Like my uncles and other cousins literally deleted Nathan's number from their phones right there, and no one has contacted him since then, as far as I know. Then, a few months passed. Elena tried to contact me several times, long emails asking for forgiveness or money or help, but I deleted them without reading after the first one. Nathan also tried to reach out through mutual friends, but no one wanted to serve as an intermediary after the whole family knew what he'd done. I heard Nathan had to move to a horrible apartment in Queens because he couldn't afford rent in Manhattan without investors, and that he was working at some normal, boring corporate job after his entrepreneurial dreams completely collapsed. Elena eventually found work at another PR firm, but making much less than before. Living in a studio on the Upper East Side, sharing with a roommate, basically back to where she'd started before meeting me, but now 5 years older and with a ruined reputation in certain social circles. My kids, Sophie and Ethan, found out about everything, of course, and although at first they were in shock because they'd liked Elena, they eventually understood their father had been betrayed in the most horrible way possible and supported me completely. Sophie especially got really angry because she'd trusted Elena and had started seeing her as a maternal figure, so the betrayal was personal for her too. We had several long conversations about trust and relationships, and how sometimes people show who they really are only when they have something to gain or lose. The investment in Nathan's company was a total loss, obviously. The $500,000 basically evaporated. But honestly, it was the price I paid for learning a valuable lesson about mixing family with business and about letting the heart cloud business judgment. Since then, I've been much more careful about who I trust and where I put my money, and also with personal relationships, because the truth is this experience left me pretty cynical about people's intentions. Today, about a year and a half after everything exploded, I'm okay, I guess. I occasionally date women my age and my socioeconomic level, but nothing serious because I simply can't trust the same way as before. The penthouse is quieter now, like I completely redesigned it to erase any trace of Elena. New furniture, new colors, basically started from scratch. My kids come visit me more often, which is good, and I've reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the years with Elena because she always wanted to go to pretentious social events instead of casual hangouts. The company is better than ever, ironically, because I've been able to focus completely on work without emotional distractions. I made some big investments this year that are giving incredible results, like 40–50% returns, and I'm expanding into new markets in Asia. Money was never the problem, obviously, but it's good to see that at least that part of my life is thriving while the personal part remains complicated. What bothers me most still is thinking about how much time I wasted living a lie, like years of my life where I thought I was happy with Elena, when in reality, she was just using my money and sleeping with my cousin, and who knows how many other guys. I constantly wonder how many times she lied to my face, how many nights when she said she was with friends she was really in some hotel with Nathan, how many of our special moments together were real for her or just part of her act to keep me happy and generous. Those questions probably will never. I have answers, and I have to make peace with that. Sometimes I think maybe I went too far with my revenge, like completely destroying their lives and exiling Nathan from the family seems severe when I write it like that. But then I remember those messages where they talked about manipulating me, where they laughed about how easy it was to fool me, where they planned to literally steal millions of dollars from me after a strategic divorce, and any feeling of guilt disappears immediately. They made conscious decisions to betray me in the deepest way possible, knowing exactly what they were doing, and the consequences of those decisions are completely deserved. The family is better without Nathan, honestly. Several cousins have told me they always knew he was problematic but never imagined he'd go that far. Family gatherings are smaller now, but also more genuine, without having to worry about who's planning what behind my back. Sophie got engaged a few months ago to a good guy who works in finance, and I'm helping them with the wedding planning that'll be next summer in the Hamptons. Ironically, in the same place where I married Elena years ago, though this time it'll be a real celebration of true love and not an elaborate farce. I guess in the end I learned that no matter how much money you have or how successful you are, that doesn't protect you from being betrayed by the people closest to you. The difference is that when you have resources, you can at least make sure those people pay for what they did, that they don't get away with it completely. I don't know if that makes me a better person or just more calculated and cold, but honestly, I don't care as much as I should anymore. The last I heard of Elena was about 3 months ago, when a mutual friend casually mentioned she'd seen her at a Starbucks on the Upper East Side, looking tired and older than she should look at 29. That friend said Elena asked about me, whether I was dating anyone, or if there was any possibility of reconciliation, and my friend told her definitely not, that I'd moved on completely. I felt nothing when I heard that, neither satisfaction nor pity, just a kind of emptiness where there used to be love, or at least the illusion of love. Nathan supposedly is in therapy from what I heard around, trying to deal with having lost his entire family and his entrepreneurial aspirations in one stupid move. Part of me feels sorry for him because we grew up together, and there were good times before all this. But that part is very small, compared to the rage I still feel when I think about how they planned everything so carefully. I don't think I can ever forgive him, and honestly, I don't want to try. So here I am, 54 years old, richer than ever, with a family that supports me, kids who love me, but also with this empty space where trust in people used to be. Was the revenge worth it? In practical terms, yes. I protected my money and my reputation and made sure the traitors paid. Emotionally? I'm not sure, because in the end I'm still alone and cynical, and probably will never be able to trust anyone the same way again. But I guess that's the price of protecting yourself in a world where people are willing to do anything for money and status, even betray the people they claim to love.